The awkward request. Sergeant Jake Carter walked through the massive glowing halls of the Celtronian embassy. His boots clicked against the smooth, crystal-like floor. The air smelled faintly of alien spices, and strange biolights pulsed softly along the walls. Jake adjusted his military jacket nervously. He was a soldier, trained to fight, not to deal with alien politics. So why had the Celtronian ambassador herself summoned him? He reached the grand doors to the ambassador's chamber. They hissed open, revealing a tall, majestic alien seated on a throne-like chair. Ambassador Zelva was an imposing figure, standing over 7 feet tall, with shimmering green skin and glowing blue eyes. Her long, flowing robes did little to hide her impressive, curvaceous figure, a fact Jake tried hard to ignore. Zelva's gaze locked onto him, sharp and unwavering. "Sergeant Carter," she said in a deep, commanding voice. "You are late." Jake saluted stiffly, trying to keep his cool. "Apologies, ma'am. I came as fast as I could." She studied him for a moment, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Good. I require your assistance with an urgent matter." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Assistance? With what?" Zelva leaned forward, her expression serious. "I need you to milk me." For a moment, Jake thought he'd misheard her. He blinked, his brain struggling to process her words. "I'm sorry, you need me to what?" "Milk me," she repeated, her tone completely serious. Jake stared at her, his mouth slightly open. This had to be a joke, some kind of alien prank, but Zelva's expression didn't change. She wasn't joking. "Ma'am," Jake said, scratching the back of his neck, "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I'm a soldier, not a farmer." Zelva sighed, as if she were dealing with a particularly slow child. "This is no joke, Sergeant. My people's biology is different from yours. We produce a rare fluid that is essential for interstellar diplomacy. Without it, peace talks between our species will fail. But the process is delicate. It requires assistance." Jake's confusion only deepened. "And you're asking me to do it? Don't you have, I don't know, other Xeltronians who can help?" She shook her head. "The stress of our current situation has blocked my production. Only a neutral party can assist." Jake frowned. "Neutral? I'm a human soldier stationed on your planet. That doesn't exactly scream neutral." Zelva's glowing eyes bore into him. "You are the only one I can trust. Refusal is not an option, Sergeant." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't sure if he should laugh, run, or call for backup. "Look, Ambassador, I'm trying to understand, but you're asking me to do something. Very personal. Don't you think this is a little inappropriate?" Zelva tilted her head, clearly confused by his reaction. "Why would it be inappropriate? This is a matter of duty and survival, not personal preference." Jake sighed. This wasn't going to end well, was it? "Okay, let's say I agree. How does this process even work?" Zelva stood gracefully, towering over him. She gestured to a strange, glowing device on a nearby table. It looked like a cross between a high-tech blender and an alien artifact. "You will use this apparatus to extract the fluid. I will guide you step by step." Jake eyed the device warily. "That thing doesn't look safe. What happens if I mess up?" Zelva's expression grew even more serious. "Failure could result in my death. And if I die, the peace treaty dies with me." Jake took a step back, his hands raised. "Whoa, whoa, whoa. You didn't mention death when you started this conversation. I assumed your human sense of duty would make such details irrelevant," Zelva said calmly. Jake ran a hand through his short, dark hair, muttering under his breath. "This has to be the weirdest day of my life." Zelva crossed her arms, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Time is running out, Sergeant. Will you assist me, or must I report your insubordination to your superiors?" Jake stiffened at the threat. He didn't like being strong-armed, especially by an alien diplomat. But if she was telling the truth, and he had no reason to believe she wasn't, This situation was bigger than his personal discomfort. Lives were at stake. He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. Fine. I'll do it. But for the record, I'm not happy about this. Zelva's lips curved into a faint smile. Your cooperation is noted. Now, let us begin. Jake approached the glowing device, his nerves jangling. This better not blow up in my face, he muttered. As he reached for the controls, Zelva's voice rang out. Be careful, human. This process requires precision. If you fail. Jake cut her off with a wry smile. Yeah. We both die. No pressure, right? Zelva didn't smile back. Precisely. Jake gulped, realizing just how serious she was. This was going to be one hell of a story, if he lived to tell it. The alien biology lesson. Jake stared at the glowing machine, its soft hum filling the room like the purring of a large, dangerous animal. The device looked like it belonged in a sci-fi horror movie, with its pulsing lights and a series of alien symbols that meant absolutely nothing to him. I'm going to regret this, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Zelva stepped forward, her towering figure moving with alien grace. She gestured toward the machine. This is a Celtronian extraction device. It is designed to collect our biological fluids safely, but it requires careful handling. One mistake could trigger undesirable effects. Jake's eyebrows shot up. Undesirable. Like what? Zelva's glowing eyes locked onto his. At best, a failed extraction. At worst, a chain reaction that could destabilize my internal systems. I would combust. Jake took a step back. Combust, like explode. Yes, Zelva said it so calmly, it was as if she were discussing the weather. Jake pinched the bridge of his nose. Great, so now I'm not just milking you. I'm defusing a bomb at the same time. Fantastic. Zelva ignored his sarcasm, moving closer to the machine. You need to understand the process first. Celtronians produce this fluid during times of extreme stress or urgency. It is a defense mechanism but also serves as a crucial resource for interstellar negotiations. Jake folded his arms, trying to keep his cool. Stress. You're telling me this is some kind of alien adrenaline. In a way, Zelva admitted, but far more complex. The fluid is imbued with mineral properties that can influence peaceful outcomes. Without it, our treaties fail, wars ignite, and millions could die. Jake let out a low whistle. No pressure then. Zelva stepped closer to him, her glowing eyes softer now. Sergeant Carter, I understand this is unusual for your species, but you must trust me. The process is straightforward, and I will guide you. Jake glanced at the machine again. Straightforward. Nothing about this situation felt straightforward. Fine. Tell me what to do. Zelva nodded. First, you must activate the interface. Place your hand here. She pointed to a panel on the machine that glowed faintly. Jake hesitated. This isn't going to, scan my brain or steal my fingerprints, is it? Zelva raised an eyebrow. Your skepticism is. Noted. It will not harm you. Place your hand on the panel. Jake exhaled and placed his hand on the glowing surface. The machine whirred to life, alien symbols lighting up in rapid sequence. He felt a strange warmth spread through his hand, like the machine was reading his body heat. Good, Zelva said, her voice steady. Now, adjust the calibration here. She pointed to a series of knobs and levers, all of which looked completely alien to him. Jake's hand hovered over them. You're assuming I know what any of this does. Zelva sighed, a hint of impatience in her tone. The red lever controls pressure. The green dial adjusts extraction speed. The blue button is an emergency override. Jake frowned. And what does the emergency override do? It prevents catastrophic failure, Zelva said simply. Right, catastrophic failure. I'll try not to hit that one. As Jake followed Zelva's instructions, he began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor. Her usual calm and authoritative presence was cracking. Her breathing became uneven, and her glowing eyes flickered slightly. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, his hands pausing over the controls. "I am fine," Zelva replied, but her voice was tight. "Continue. The process must begin now." Jake turned the green dial slowly, watching as the machine emitted a soft, rhythmic hum. A faint, glowing liquid began to flow into a transparent chamber on the side of the device. "Is that it?" Jake asked, his voice filled with cautious hope. "Not yet," Zelva said. Her hands gripped the edge of the chair she had settled into, her knuckles glowing faintly. "The process will take time. You must keep the flow steady." As the minutes ticked by, Jake's nerves began to fray. The machine's hum grew louder, and the glowing liquid started to swirl in the chamber like a tiny galaxy. He glanced at Zelva, who seemed to be struggling to keep her composure. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again. Zelva's voice was strained. "The stress of the process is significant, but I will endure. Do not stop, no matter what happens." Jake didn't like the sound of that. He tightened his grip on the controls, his heart pounding. "What exactly happens if I stop?" Zelva's eyes locked onto his, their glow dimmer than before. "If you stop, the buildup of energy in my system could trigger a biological implosion. We would both die." Jake groaned. "You really need to work on your motivational speeches, you know that." Zelva didn't respond, her focus entirely on the process. Suddenly, the machine emitted a loud beep, and the flow of liquid slowed to a trickle. Alarms began to flash on the device, the alien symbols flickering erratically. "What's happening?" Jake shouted. Zelva's glowing eyes widened. "The extraction process is destabilizing. Quickly, adjust the red lever." Jake's hands flew to the controls, sweat dripping down his forehead. He yanked the red lever upward, but the alarms continued to blare. "Is it working?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Not yet," Zelva gasped, her body trembling. "You must stabilize the flow or the entire system will collapse." Jake gritted his teeth, his fingers flying over the controls as the machine's hum grew louder and more chaotic. "I'm a soldier, not a freaking engineer." "Then learn quickly, human," Zelva snapped. As the machine's alarms reached a deafening pitch, Jake slammed his hand down on the blue button. The emergency override. The machine hissed and shuddered, its lights flickering wildly. For a moment, everything went silent. Then the glowing liquid began to flow smoothly again, filling the chamber with a soft, golden light. Jake exhaled shakily, his hands trembling. "Tell me that means it's working." Zelva nodded weakly, her glowing eyes meeting his. "For now. But the hardest part is yet to come." Jake groaned, already dreading what that meant. The process begins. The chamber's golden glow bathed the room, casting dancing patterns on the walls. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand still hovering nervously over the alien controls. He wanted to believe the worst was over, but one glance at Zelva told him otherwise. Her normally confident demeanor was crumbling. She clutched the armrests of the glowing chair, her breathing shallow. "Okay," Jake muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The flow is stable. That's good, right?" Zelva's glowing eyes fluttered open, her voice tight. "The flow is stable, but the extraction process requires balance. Too much or too little pressure could destabilize the bioenergy in my system." Jake frowned, his fingers twitching over the red lever. "Why does this sound more like surgery than milking?" "Because, in a way, it is," Zelva said, her voice strained. He grimaced. "Great. No pressure then." The machine hummed louder, the golden liquid swirling like liquid fire in the chamber. It was mesmerizing in a way, almost hypnotic. But Jake quickly snapped himself out of it. "All right. What's next?" Zelva pointed weakly to a glowing console. "You must engage the next phase. Turn the central dial, slowly, until the light turns green." Jake squinted at the console. It had no words, just alien symbols that made no sense to him. "Which one's the central dial?" The largest one, Zelva said, her voice losing patience. The one in the middle, Sergeant. Jake muttered under his breath and reached for the dial. It was cold and metallic, and as he turned it slowly, the machine's hum shifted to a higher pitch. The swirling liquid glowed brighter, filling the room with an almost blinding light. "That's it," Zelva said, her voice trembling. "Keep it steady." Jake was about to make a sarcastic comment when the machine emitted a loud, sharp beep. The hum turned into a low growl, and the lights on the console flickered wildly. Zelva." Jake's voice rose an octave. "This doesn't look steady to me." Zelva's eyes widened, and she gripped the armrests tightly. "The energy levels are spiking. You need to reduce the pressure immediately." Jake's hands flew to the red lever, but the machine resisted his movements. "It's stuck," he shouted, yanking on it with all his strength. Zelva winced, her body beginning to glow faintly. "If you don't stabilize it, the bioenergy in my system will overload. The consequences will be catastrophic." Jake's jaw clenched. "Catastrophic how? You keep throwing that word around. And I feel like it's important." Zelva's glow intensified, her voice barely a whisper. "If the energy overloads, I will detonate." Jake's eyes widened. "Detonate? Like a bomb? Why is everything with you aliens always life or death?" "Focus, human," Zelva snapped, her voice regaining some strength. Jake grabbed the blue override button again and slammed his hand down on it. The machine hissed loudly, the golden liquid bubbling furiously in the chamber. For a moment, he thought the whole thing might explode in his face. But then the hum evened out, and the lights on the console turned from red to a soft, steady green. Did I fix it?" Jake asked, his voice filled with cautious relief. Zelva relaxed slightly, her glowing skin dimming. "For now. But you must continue the process. The fluid must be extracted completely, or the balance in my system will remain unstable." Jake groaned. "You're telling me there's more?" Zelva nodded weakly. "This is only the second phase. The final phase is the most delicate." Jake slumped against the console, glaring at the machine as if it had personally offended him. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" As the process continued, the glowing liquid filled the chamber to the halfway mark. Jake watched it swirl, feeling a strange pull in the back of his mind. It was almost as if the liquid was alive, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. "Zelva," he said cautiously, "is this stuff supposed to feel weird? Like it's watching me?" Zelva's eyes fluttered open again, her expression unreadable. "You're sensing the bioenergy within it. The fluid is not just a resource. It is connected to us, to all living things. You may feel its presence, but do not let it distract you." Jake shook his head. "Yeah, easier said than done." Suddenly, the machine emitted another sharp beep. This time, the golden liquid began to glow brighter, almost blindingly so. The console lights flickered, and a low rumble filled the room. "What now?" Jake shouted over the noise. "The final phase is beginning." Zelva gasped. "You must synchronize the flow with my energy levels. Adjust the green dial to match the pulse of the lights." Jake squinted at the console, trying to match the dial's movements to the flashing lights. His heart pounded as the room seemed to pulse in time with the machine. "Come on," he muttered, his hands shaking. "Don't blow up on me now." The machine's hum grew louder, and the golden liquid began to overflow into a secondary chamber. Zelva's body glowed faintly, her breathing shallow but steady. "You're doing it," Zelva said, her voice barely audible. "The process is nearly complete." Jake didn't dare relax. His eyes stayed fixed on the console, his hands moving instinctively over the controls. Finally, the machine emitted a soft chime, and the lights turned a steady blue. Jake exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping in relief. "Please tell me that's it." Zelva nodded, her glow fading. "The extraction is complete. You have succeeded." Jake leaned against the machine, his legs shaking. I don't know how you aliens survive like this. This is the most stressful thing I've ever done, and I've been shot at for a living. Zelva gave him a faint smile. Your resilience is commendable, Sergeant, but this is only the beginning. Jake groaned, rubbing his temples. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Alien sabotage. The room was eerily quiet after the machine powered down. The golden liquid swirled calmly in its chamber, as if mocking Jake's frazzled nerves. He slumped against the nearest wall, gulping in air like he'd run a marathon. That was insane, he muttered, glaring at the machine. Is there some kind of user manual I missed? Because this feels like it shouldn't be this hard. Zelva, her glowing eyes dimmer than before, slowly rose from the chair. She swayed slightly but steadied herself, her tall figure regaining its usual elegance. You performed admirably, Sergeant Carter. The fluid has been successfully extracted. Jake let out a short laugh. Yeah, great. Can I go back to my barracks now? Maybe sleep for a week. Before Zelva could respond, the chamber lights flickered. A low, rumbling noise echoed through the walls, like distant thunder. Jake instantly tensed, his soldier instincts kicking in. What was that? He asked, standing straight. Zelva tilted her head, her expression sharp. I do not know. This facility is secure. Another rumble, louder this time, shook the ground beneath them. Dust rained down from the ornate ceiling, and the golden liquid in the chamber rippled violently. Jake grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. Secure, huh? That doesn't sound secure to me. Before Zelva could reply, a deafening explosion tore through the embassy. The blast came from somewhere above, and the force of it sent Jake and Zelva stumbling. Alarms blared, their piercing wail filling the air. Zelva's glowing eyes flared brightly. We are under attack. No kidding. Jake shouted over the noise, gripping his rifle tightly. The grand chamber doors burst open, and a squad of alien mercenaries stormed in. Their armor gleamed with a dull silver sheen, and their weapons buzzed with lethal energy. Jake's heart raced as he recognized their markings, Kravathian raiders, infamous for their ruthlessness. The lead mercenary, a hulking figure with glowing red eyes, stepped forward and pointed his weapon at Zelva. Ambassador, he growled, his voice guttural and laced with menace, hand over the fluid, or we will take it from your corpse. Zelva straightened, her regal presence undiminished despite the threat. You dare attack this embassy? Do you have any idea what you are doing? The mercenary sneered. We know exactly what we're doing. That fluid is too valuable to leave in your hands, or theirs. He gestured toward Jake with disdain. Jake stepped forward, raising his rifle. Yeah. Well, you're not getting it. Not on my watch. The mercenary's red eyes glowed brighter, his weapon humming ominously. Brave words, human. Let's see how long you last. Before Jake could fire, Zelva grabbed his arm. The fluid must not fall into their hands. We must protect it at all costs. Jake glanced at her, then back at the mercenaries. Got a plan, Ambassador? Because I'm not seeing a lot of options here. Zelva's glowing eyes flickered, calculating. Follow me. Without waiting for his response, she sprinted toward a hidden panel in the wall. Jake cursed under his breath but followed, firing. Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. The fluid. It's not just some trade resource. It's a weapon. A mind control device. That's why the Kravathians are after it. Because if they get it, they can use it to enslave entire planets. But she's no better. She'll use it to dominate us, Jake. Earth won't stand a chance. Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. He glanced at Zelva, whose glowing eyes remained unreadable. Is that true? He asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Zelva's expression didn't waver. The fluid is a tool. Like any tool, its purpose depends on the one who wields it. In my hands, it is a key to peace. In theirs, it is a key to chaos. Daniels laughed bitterly. Peace. Don't buy her lies, Jake. I've seen the files. Earth Command knows what this stuff really does. They just didn't tell you because they wanted a patsy, a grunt they could throw under the bus if things went sideways. Jake's mind raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He looked between Daniels and Zelva, both of them waiting for his decision. "Why should I trust you?" Jake asked Daniels, his voice sharp. "You show up out of nowhere, making accusations without proof. How do I know you're not working with the Kravothians?" Daniels' face twisted in frustration. "Because I'm risking my life to stop this madness. If you don't destroy that fluid now, you'll regret it." Zelva stepped forward, her towering figure imposing in the confined space. "Destroying the fluid would destabilize the peace treaty and ignite a war that would consume your world as well as mine. Do not let his fear blind you, Sergeant Carter." Jake took a step back, his rifle still raised. "All right, enough. Both of you, shut up." The tunnel fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake's thoughts raced as he weighed his options. Every instinct screamed that something was off, but he couldn't afford to make the wrong call. Before he could decide, the walls trembled violently, and a loud explosion rocked the passageway. Dust and debris rained down as a section of the tunnel behind them collapsed. "They found us," Zelva shouted, her glowing eyes flaring brightly. Daniels cursed under his breath. "This is what I'm talking about. They'll stop at nothing to get that fluid. If you won't destroy it, at least let me help you escape." Jake glared at him. "And why should I trust you with that?" Daniels opened his mouth to reply, but a deafening roar cut him off. A massive armored Kravothian soldier barreled through the wreckage, its energy weapon glowing ominously. Behind it, more mercenaries swarmed into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing like thunder. "Move," Jake shouted, firing off a burst of rounds. The Kravothian soldier absorbed the shots with its thick armor and returned fire, its energy blasts scorching the walls. Jake ducked, pulling Zelva with him as they scrambled down the tunnel. Daniels ran ahead, shouting over his shoulder, "There's another exit up ahead. Follow me." Jake hesitated. Trusting Daniels felt like walking into a trap, but the mercenaries were closing in fast. He didn't have a choice. "Keep up," he barked at Zelva, sprinting after Daniels. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them into single file. Jake fired blindly behind him, hoping to slow their pursuers. The mercenaries' weapons lit up the passageway with flashes of blue and red, the sound of energy blasts deafening. Daniels reached a sealed door at the end of the tunnel and slammed his hand against a panel. The door hissed open, revealing a small chamber filled with strange, glowing symbols. "This way," Daniels shouted, waving them inside. Jake hesitated, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. But the Kravothians were almost on them, and he didn't have time to second-guess himself. He shoved Zelva through the door and followed, the heavy blast door sealing behind them, just as the mercenaries reached it. The room fell silent, except for the sound of their ragged breathing. Jake lowered his rifle, his heart pounding. "All right," he said, glaring at Daniels. "You got us here. Now explain why I shouldn't shoot you right now." Daniels raised his hands defensively. "Because I want the same thing you do, Jake, to make it out of this alive. But if you trust her," he pointed at Zelva, "you won't." Zelva stepped forward, her glowing eyes fierce. "You are a fool if you think you can stop what is already in motion. The fluid's purpose is greater than you or I." Jake held up a hand. "Enough. Both of you, I've had it with your games. Start talking, and this time, tell me the truth. All of it." The room fell into a tense silence as the two stared each other down. Jake's finger hovered over the trigger of his rifle, ready for anything. In the dim glow of the chamber, the stakes had never been higher. And Jake knew one thing for sure: someone wasn't walking out of here alive. The living weapon. The chamber was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the glowing symbols etched into the walls. Jake stood in the center, his rifle still at the ready but his mind racing. He had expected a fight, a chase, or at the very least more danger. But this was something different. The tension was thick, and everyone in the room seemed to be on the edge of a precipice. Daniels was the first to break the silence, his voice trembling with urgency. "Jake, you've got to listen to me. That fluid, it's not just a diplomatic tool. It's not just a weapon. It's alive." Zelva's eyes flared with intensity as she took a step forward, her voice cold and firm. "It is not alive in the way you understand it, Sergeant, but it is more than just a simple resource. It is a part of our biology, connected to our very being." Jake glanced between the two, his mind struggling to catch up. Alive? Connected? What the hell does that even mean? Daniel's face twisted in frustration. "It means that fluid is sentient. It can think, it can feel. And right now, it's growing more powerful with every moment it's in Zelva's possession. She's lying to you, Jake. She's not here to protect it. She's here to control it. And if she does, we're all screwed." Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of it. "You're telling me that this liquid stuff, this thing, is like some kind of alien superweapon that can read minds and control us?" Zelva spoke before Daniels could respond. "No, Sergeant. It does not control. It guides. The fluid has the ability to influence outcomes. It is a tool of peace when used correctly. But it is also a power that can corrupt if it falls into the wrong hands." Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. "So you're saying it's a good thing, and Daniels here is just paranoid?" Zelva's glowing eyes softened, her expression almost wistful. "In the wrong hands, yes, it could become a weapon of destruction. But that is why we, the Teltronians, must protect it. It is not just for trade. It is the key to our survival, and to the survival of the galaxy." Jake looked at Daniels, whose face had gone pale with desperation. "So why is he so sure it's dangerous? He's acting like it's some kind of ticking time bomb." Daniels took a deep breath, stepping closer. "Because I've seen it, Jake. I've seen what happens when the fluid is used improperly. I saw it in the files, the records that Earth Command has been keeping from you. They know what it's capable of, but they've been using you, using all of us, as pawns in this game." Zelva's face darkened, her voice low and controlled. "You misunderstand, human. Earth's leaders have not been using you. They have been trying to prevent the chaos that would arise if the fluid were ever to fall into the hands of those who wish to enslave entire civilizations. The Kravathians, the Skrull, they are only the beginning. If they gain control of the fluid, there will be nothing left but ashes." Daniel scoffed. "And what about you, Zelva? How do we know you're not just another empire, waiting for the right moment to strike? You're telling me this fluid can end wars, but you're not the first alien race to claim that. We've seen how this ends before." Zelva stepped closer, her towering form casting a shadow over Daniels. "I am not them. I do not seek war, but I will not sit idly by as my people, and your people, fall into chaos. The fluid must be protected. And to do that, I need your trust, Sergeant Carter." Jake felt a strange weight on his shoulders as he listened to them. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about protecting a single piece of technology. It was about preventing a war that could consume everything. But could he really trust Zelva? He looked at Daniels, whose face was twisted in doubt. "And you? You really think destroying it will stop the war? Or are you just afraid of what it can do in the hands of someone else?" Daniels didn't flinch. "I'm afraid of what it will do in anyone's hands, Jake. I've seen the files. I've seen what it can do to us. I'm trying to stop a disaster before it starts." Jake paused, his mind racing. Everything he had fought for, the loyalty to Earth, the mission, the belief that he was doing the right thing, was crumbling. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was pulling the strings. Was it Zelva? Or was Daniels right, and they were all being used as pawns in a game far larger than they could comprehend? Suddenly, the room shook again. This time, the tremors were violent, as if the very planet was shifting beneath them. "What now?" Jake shouted, grabbing his rifle once more. Zelva's glowing eyes flared, and she turned toward the entrance of the chamber. "The Kravathians. They are closer than we anticipated." Daniels cursed. "We don't have time for this. If we don't destroy the fluid now, it's going to be too late." Jake stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Enough," he shouted. "Both of you. We need to focus. If the Kravathians are coming, we don't have time to argue. We fight first, then we talk." Zelva's voice softened, but the weight of her words hit Jake like a hammer. "You must understand, Sergeant Carter. The fluid is not simply an object. It is a bond. It is connected to me, to my people, and now to you. You are part of this, whether you choose to accept it or not." Jake felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to be part of this alien conflict, didn't want to be caught in the middle of a galactic struggle. But the truth was staring him in the face. There was no going back. "We fight first," Jake repeated, his voice firm. "Then we figure out what the hell is going on." Zelva nodded solemnly. "Very well, human. We will fight. But know this, the path you choose now will determine the fate of your people, your planet, and the galaxy itself." Daniels looked at Jake with wild, pleading eyes. "Don't listen to her. You have to destroy it now." Jake met his eyes, a cold resolve settling in. "No, we protect it. For now." With that, he turned, leading them out of the chamber and toward the looming threat outside. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing. Whatever happened next, he would have to live with the consequences, and he wasn't sure if the galaxy would survive it. The living weapon. The room trembled once more violently this time. The sound of explosions echoed in the distance, reverberating through the walls like thunder. Jake's instincts screamed that they were running out of time. The Kravathians were closing in, and every second that passed brought them closer to total destruction. Jake shot a glance at Daniels, who was pacing nervously, his face pale with fear. "You're not making this any easier, you know that." Jake snapped. "We need to work together if we're going to survive this." Daniels looked up at him, eyes wild. "Jake, this fluid, it's not just some biological thing. It's a weapon. A weapon that could make you and your people slaves to whoever controls it. Do you understand?" His voice cracked with urgency. "She's trying to protect it because she knows how dangerous it really is." Zelva stepped forward, her expression cold but resolute. "You are wrong. It is not a weapon of enslavement. It is a tool for unity, a bridge between species. Without it, war will spread across the stars, and your people will be at the center of it." Jake didn't flinch as he looked between the two of them. The argument felt endless, but time was running out. "Enough. We don't have time to debate philosophy. The Kravathians are coming for us, and I'm not dying in a room full of paranoia and mistrust." Daniel's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Then you'll regret it. I'm telling you, there are things you don't know about this fluid, things you can't know until it's too late." Zelva's expression hardened, her glowing eyes flashing with warning. "If you continue down this path, Daniels, you will be responsible for the death of countless beings. This is bigger than either of us. It always has been." Jake held up a hand. He didn't want to hear any more accusations or justifications. "We're not getting anywhere with this. The only thing we can do is survive. Once we've done that, maybe then we'll figure out what the hell this all means." The ground shook again, harder this time, knocking them off balance. The low hum of approaching ships filled the air, vibrating through the walls like a distant, hungry growl. The Kravathians were here. "Take the fluid to the storage chamber," Zelva ordered, her voice sharp. She moved swiftly to a glowing panel, her fingers moving over it with practiced precision. A hidden door slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in cold light. Jake didn't hesitate. "Let's go. Daniels, stay behind me. If you try anything—" "I'm not here to cause trouble," Daniels interrupted, his voice tight. "I'm just trying to help. I don't want to see you make the same mistake I did." The three of them rushed through the corridor, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow space. The tension between them was palpable, a sharp edge in the air that only grew thicker as they neared the storage chamber. Zelva moved ahead, her towering figure blocking their path. "Once inside, we'll activate the containment systems. The fluid must be sealed, and then we'll deal with the Kravothians." She turned to Jake, her glowing eyes softening for a moment. "This is the only way to ensure its safety." Jake gave her a wary glance. "And what happens after the Kravothians are dealt with? You expect me to trust that everything will be okay?" Zelva paused, looking at him seriously. "I do not expect trust to be given freely, Sergeant, but I do ask for your cooperation, for the sake of all our futures." Before Jake could respond, a loud crashing sound reverberated through the corridor. A group of Kravothian soldiers appeared at the far end of the hallway, their heavy armor making them look like walking tanks. They raised their weapons, their eyes glowing with cold malice. "We found you, Ambassador," the lead Kravothian growled. "Surrender the fluid, or your species will pay the price." Zelva didn't flinch. She raised her hand, and a shield of shimmering energy appeared, blocking the advancing soldiers. "You will not take it. Not today." Jake fired his weapon, the round striking the Kravothian's armor with little effect. The mercenaries were too well armored, and the energy weapons they wielded were far superior. "We need to fall back," Jake shouted, grabbing Zelva's arm. "The fluid's not going anywhere until we're safe." "No," Zelva replied firmly. "The fluid must be protected. If you cannot protect it, then we must rely on its power to ensure its survival." Jake's head was spinning. He didn't have time for another speech. He turned to Daniels, who was already firing at the advancing mercenaries. "Daniels, we need a plan now." Daniels cursed, his rifle shaking in his hands. "There's no time for planning. Just fight." Zelva's shield flickered as more Kravothians moved in, closing the gap between them with terrifying speed. Jake's heart raced as the realization hit him. They couldn't hold out forever. The Kravothians would overwhelm them. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them shook again, harder this time, as if the entire embassy was buckling under the strain. A low hum reverberated through the walls, like a pulse, a heartbeat echoing through the chamber. "What's happening?" Jake shouted, trying to steady himself. Zelva's eyes widened in alarm. "It's the fluid. It's reacting to the threat. The energy within it is responding to the aggression." The ground trembled violently, and Jake felt a strange, electric sensation in the air, as though the very atmosphere had thickened with power. Suddenly, the walls lit up in a blinding flash, and the hum grew deafening, a powerful force radiating outward. For a moment, everything stopped. The Kravothians froze, their weapons still raised. Even Daniel stood still, his mouth agape. Jake looked around, his head spinning. The entire chamber felt like it was alive. Then, in the next instant, the power surge. A shockwave of energy erupted from the fluid, blasting through the Kravothians and sending them flying backward. The blast was so powerful that it shattered the walls around them, and the Kravothian soldiers were thrown like ragdolls, their armor crushed by the sheer force of the blast. Jake barely managed to hold his ground as the energy washed over him. The air was electric, alive with a raw primal force. Zelva stood at the epicenter, her body surrounded by a shimmering glow, her eyes closed in concentration. "What the hell is happening?" Jake gasped, struggling to stay on his feet. Zelva opened her eyes, and for the first time, Jake saw something more than the calm diplomat, the raw power of her species, the weight of her responsibility. "The fluid has made its choice," she said, her voice stronger than before. "It will protect us, but only for as long as we remain worthy of its power." Jake's heart pounded. He had no idea what had just happened, but one thing was clear: this was only the beginning. And the galaxy was never going to be the same. Sacrifice and victory. The air was thick with static, the remnants of the massive energy surge still crackling in the walls. Jake stood in the aftermath, his breath coming in sharp gasps, his heart racing. The Kravothian soldiers, their bodies sprawled across the hallway, were all motionless. Not a single one had survived the blast. Zelva's body was still glowing faintly, her eyes dimming as the energy subsided. She stood tall, her breathing steady, but there was a quiet exhaustion in her gaze. The fluid had chosen its moment, responding with a force none of them had expected. Jake couldn't help but feel both awed and terrified by what had just happened. "What was that?" Jake asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and wonder. Zelva lowered her hand, the shimmering energy dissipating into the air. It was the fluid. It reacted to the threat. It is not just a resource. It is a living force, a guardian. It protected us from the Kravothians, but it cannot protect us forever. We must use its power wisely. Jake looked around the corridor, still reeling from the sheer force of what had happened. The walls were cracked, the doors blown off their hinges, and the floor was littered with debris. He could still hear the faint hum of the energy that had pulsed through the air, as if the very building was alive. Daniel, still wide-eyed, approached slowly, his gun lowered. That was insane. He swallowed hard, looking at Zelva with a mix of awe and fear. So, what now? The Kravothians are all but wiped out, but there's still a lot of questions. Zelva's eyes softened as she looked at Jake and Daniel's. The battle is not over. The Kravothians may have fallen, but their leaders are still out there. We must move quickly, before they regroup. The fluid has shown us its power, but it will not fight our battles for us. It has chosen to protect us, but now it is our turn to protect it. Jake felt the weight of her words. The fluid, this strange, living force that had just saved them, was not some miraculous weapon to wield recklessly. It was a responsibility, a force that required care, respect, and above all, balance. "We've been used," Daniels muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "All of us. Earth Command, the Kravothians, even you, Zelva. You've been playing this game for years, and now we're all stuck in it." Zelva's gaze hardened. "I do not play games, Daniels. This is not about control. This is about survival. The galaxy is on the brink of war, and the fluid is the only thing that can ensure peace. But we cannot do it alone. It requires cooperation, understanding, something humanity, and the Celtronians have failed to achieve until now." Jake took a deep breath, trying to process everything. His mind was spinning, his thoughts conflicting. He had joined the military to protect his people, but now he was caught in a struggle much larger than anything he could have imagined. The fate of the galaxy was resting on his shoulders, and he had no idea if they were even on the right side of history. "So, what do we do now?" Jake asked, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. Zelva turned, her eyes locking onto his with a weight that made him feel small. "We take the fluid to the only place where it can be kept safe. Celtronia. It must be returned to its source, to its origin. Only there can its power be sealed away, so it cannot be used for destruction." Daniel shook his head. "But if we take it back, the Kravothians will be right behind us. They'll follow us to Celtronia. And then what? Another battle." Zelva looked back at him, her eyes cold and unwavering. "If the Kravothians come for it, we will fight. But they will not be the only ones. Others will come as well. Rivals, opportunists, even former allies. We must be ready to make the hardest decision, whether to protect it or to destroy it to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands." Jake felt the weight of her words. The fluid was more than just a tool. It was a ticking time bomb, a resource with the potential to either bring peace or ignite a galaxy-wide conflict. But in the end, it wasn't about the fluid. It was about humanity's capacity to choose, to make the right decisions, no matter how difficult. "Then let's go," Jake said, his voice firm. "We make our stand. If we're going to protect this thing, we do it now." Zelva nodded, a faint trace of approval in her eyes. You understand the gravity of what you are saying, Sergeant Carter. This is not a path of glory. This is a path of sacrifice. Sacrifice, Daniels repeated, his voice shaky. What do you mean? Zelva's expression softened for the briefest moment. The fluid has made its choice, but the cost of keeping it safe will fall on all of us. The Kravothians may have been defeated for now, but others will come. And if we fail, we will all pay the price. Jake stared at her, feeling the enormity of her words sink in. The road ahead wasn't just about fighting. It was about living with the consequences of their choices. They had the power to shape the future, but that power came at a price. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing. They had already stepped into something that could not be undone, and no matter the outcome, they would have to live with it. The distant sound of Kravothian ships echoed through the skies, signaling that the battle was far from over. But this time, they were ready. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. Zelva turned, her eyes fixed on the horizon. We will reach Celtronia. We will protect the fluid, and we will prevent this power from falling into the hands of those who would abuse it. Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. And if we can't? If it's too late? Zelva's gaze was unwavering. Then we make the hardest choice of all. We destroy it, and we ensure that no one ever uses its power again. The path ahead was uncertain, but they would face it together. The galaxy's future rested on their shoulders, and whatever happened, they would fight until the very end. As they walked out of the ruined chamber, the final battle was already waiting for them, and Jake could feel the weight of it pressing on his chest. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about protecting the fluid. It was about saving the galaxy itself. And that would require more than just courage. It would require the strength to make the ultimate sacrifice.